All right, everybody, welcome back to On Cycle. Here we are again, Mike
and Robbie,
getting into another topic of the day. This one, I'm kind of excited about this one. We're going to be talking about trends in drum corps today, from DCI World and DCI All Age, just kind of maybe how things evolved and where things are going. For the next couple of years as things are coming up. Some housekeeping things, like always. Don't forget to get on there and hit subscribe. Thanks for coming out and getting involved with us today. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Every minute that you watch is a minute closer to us giving money back to somebody on tour next year in 2025.
Yeah.
So send it to your friends, send it to everybody else. That being said, let's not harp on that too much, and let's just get into the good stuff, right? So trends in drum corps in general. I think it's really one of the things, because we always talk about DCI All Age, is going all the way back to some of the very beginning of drum corps. We're talking about the 30s, 40s, those
before DCI was even a thing. I mean, decades before DCI was even a thing.
Way before DCI existed, and you had the American Legion tours, you had the VFWs that were out there, which is where, if some of you don't know, we're going to have an episode, a little history episode coming up in a little while.
Proper history episode will be great.
History, of all those
now
things.
We're just looking at large scale.
Yeah,
when the big shifts have happened.
Yeah, the big
what
shifts.
They've been towards.
Because obviously early on, drum corps were not just for kids; they were for pretty much everybody at that time, and limited with just the instrumentation that we had, technology at the time, and those kind of things. As things started to progress, and these basically, they were parade groups, decided to go, let's start putting things on the field and see something a little more formal. So that's a big switch. That's a trend of the time, I guess. As we start to get into the 50s and the 60s, and you start seeing more field performances, right?
Yeah.
A lot of different competitions and things around the country are going on, because there's a significant amount of drum corps at that time. We're probably looking at like 300 to 400 different drum corps across the country. They were a little less organized, a little bit more things. And then as we start to get into the 50s and the 60s, we really start to look at the all-age activity really kind of growing and becoming larger. That's where groups like Reading, like Hawthorne, the Skyliners.
57 was our first year.
Madison, Madison's getting ready to celebrate their 100th year anniversary or something like that.
Wild.
It's crazy. A lot of these corps have been around for a really, really long time. They weren't always just children's corps. I think the Scouts technically were always a children's corps, I say children's, I mean like your younger area, because they were the Madison Scouts, or a Boy Scout group, right? So as time moves on and things become like they always do, there's a little bit of an evolution in things. You start to move into, the 60s and 70s, and they go, hey, you know what? Let's do a bigger organization. Let's do a large grouping of things like we had DCA, was formed around that time frame. 72 DCI is obviously formed. And we really start to see the division of junior corps, and back then you used to call it senior corps, right?
Yeah.
So, and then a lot of those things, it's that whole, we come on the field from one side, we go off the field the other side. The tick system, which we'll talk about, at some point too, which is, for those of you who don't know, for all you youngsters out there don't know what the tick is. Yeah. A tick was,
especially if you're newer to drum corps and you've been called a tick, perhaps, or you've heard the word and you're not sure what it means. It all harkens back to this historic system.
Exactly.
System that we had.
Originally, that's how judging was done. Is that there would be a guy on the field or a lady on the field, or whoever else was, evaluating each individual section, and they would go through, and anytime you made a mistake, they would put a tick on a piece of paper. Yep. And then they would go at the end, and they would count up all those ticks, and that's how many points you would be minused out of 100, and that would bring your score to whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I always found it super interesting, the stuff that they would tick, because nowadays you hear mistake. You think the obvious stuff, misstep off, bad horns up, missed note, all that stuff.
Right.
Back in the day, though, they would do stuff like horn inspection. I was just reading about this. They would have a bugles up command, and you would put the bugle up, and if any spit or anything fell off, or if there's like unpolished sections, that you would get docked points. Yep. If your uniform was not pressed correctly, it's a very military thing.
Yes,
from what I understand.
Yep.
Right. If your uniform was out of alignment or a little bit wrinkled or a little bad, that you would get points off for that.
Yeah, yeah. It's
right? So it wasn't just mistakes as we think of it. It's like any kind of, lack of precision and preparation.
Yeah,
they would dock points.
Yeah, and that's that's when we talk all the things about trends, because that's what the whole episode's about. We look at, a lot of things that we talk about on the podcast is centered around the idea of being organized. Right, jugs being all in the same way. And it really, what that does is it really ties back to those, our hails back to our original days of drum corps when everything was so militaristic, prim and proper, and it was, you were evaluated based off of your attention to detail, right?
Yeah. There's a reason if anyone's ever marched with a cadets person or a cadet staff, they held on to that. The horn thing especially.
Yes.
I had a guy who marched cadets and bluecoats, who's one we were taking. He would come around, we'd have our horns lined up, we'd be doing visual. He would pick the horn up by the valves, sort of like, so he wasn't touching any of it. He would look, and like when we got back, he'd be like, there's a smudge there. You gotta go polish that.
Yeah.
We're like, oh God, Shane, please.
Yeah.
But it's like, that, like you said, that kind of discipline and focus is on, we talked about that as a tool before and like, why we still do it sometimes, but a big reason why and why it's even a thing in the first place is like you said, right? It harkens back to our roots in the activity.
Yeah. And I think some of the, as we start to talk about more in the episode, when we talk about trends and how things adjust, I think a lot of trends begin to waver and maybe go away, but sort of stay because of time restrictions, right? Or the focus of other things that we now deem are more important, right?
That's the big one I think of.
Exactly. Because we don't have time to, you don't have given 2 hours before a show to press your uniform, and to make sure that it's really clean and crisp, or, you don't take it home with you and then come back on the weekend. And, I used to do that. My first 10 years, took my uniform home with me every single weekend, and it was expected to come back washed and ready to go, So, that's like, the 70s and, as we get into the 70s, and now we start to look at major trend shifts in the activity, things like the pit. Now we're in 1982, the pit's on the field for the very first time.
I implore you, if you have not ever gone back into the vault, go back and look at some 70s even drum corps, and you will watch it and be like, why is that person marching around with a marimba drum?
Yeah.
Or with a timpani. With a timpani with xylophones.
Yeah.
Or vibra slaps if you're Renegades.
Right. Yeah.
Renegades.
Yeah.
SF. The Bad Boys of DCA.
Yeah. I used to love watching.
We're going to be talking about history a lot, and maybe a couple particular shows that make big changes. Crack open the vault, go back in if you have not before. The other weekend, some of the other vets from Bucks and I watched a bunch of Renegade 2000s shows. Renegades shows.
So fun.
They're awesome.
Yeah, right.
They're so old school DCA, but they're so fun.
Yeah.
But partially because they're so different from what we're used to these days. We're used to very polished and almost like Broadway-esque productions. We'll talk more about that later, but it's really cool to go back and see, to see what drum corps used to be and to appreciate what it used to be.
Yeah. And I think it's super important. We have obviously the podcast has been kind of heavily supported by the older community of drum corps, fans and other people. A lot of DCA, DCI, all age people have really reached out and said, "Hey, you guys doing a great job. We love what you're doing," and all those things too. So I think it's really a great call to action. We always love that here, right? A call to action to go back and look at some of those older things and really attempt to appreciate the level of detail that's going into it. It may not be what you're used to, right? Because we've changed into something totally different nowadays. Yeah. But there's so much great classic work that exists back there. Incredible shows, and everybody's like, oh, we get into the G bugle thing and all that nonsense, right? But it's hard to decipher when you look back on those things and go, well, of course today everything sounds so much better because we use B flat. Well, does it? What's the best recording you have of a good G bugle?
That's one part.
Yeah, exactly.
I see a lot of people online always be like, you had to be there in person.
Yeah, you do.
Because honestly, that's even true for drum corps nowadays. Yeah. But it's much more true when, like you said, you see some old recordings. I found an old recording, I think, of Buck's show from like the 80s or something.
Yeah.
It was just like, it looked like it was being viewed through a U-boat periscope. It was awful. But it was like, this is the only record of the show that we have, right? Or that we have access to right now.
Yeah. And a lot of the stuff from the 70s and the 80s, it kind of looks like that, So again, as we move through trends, you start to look at, trend setters, as we start to move forward. And we look at organizations that decided to take something and do something just a little bit different. To take
risks,
risks to make something a little bit different. That has been the history of drum corps, in my personal opinion, right? Because we always have this online argument of the old people and the young people and blah, 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 whatever. Okay, great.
What drum corps used to be and what it is now.
What it is now. But really, I look at what drum corps used to be and go, those were the real risk takers, right? Those are the people, trendsetters and people who were changed the activity was 2 generations before me. Right, not the 90s, not the late 90s guys, not even the 80s guys, maybe the early 80s, late 80s, era of members and staff and designers. They were the ones that really started to push the envelope when we started to look at things like a third valve, right, in brass instruments, and you could finally play the entire scale without bending.
Play actual chromatic scales.
Yeah, exactly. Without bending to everything. Like I've said this before, my first season, I was on a 2-valve, contrabass, and there were parts of the show that were written and everybody else had 3 valves, and they were written and they were like, we can't play that note, and they're like, oh yeah, it's right. You guys don't have a third valve. And they would have to redo the our music to something that we could be able to use. So we're limited in that. So as time moves forward and we see the trends change, I think a lot of times the trends change because of technology. Right. And as you watch those mid 80s, early 90s drum corps, a lot of stuff is happening. Right. We're no longer coming on from the end zone, coming to the 50, doing inspections, doing whatever, and then leaving out the other side of the end zone. Like it's the same thing. Those things were used to lose points for that stuff. Don't come on the field, in a straight line.
It was a rule. I mean, there was a rule that said you had to be between 128 and 132 beats per minute.
Yeah, right.
And if you went outside of that range, because it was so based on marches and the military, right? And that's marching speed.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. If you got too fast and too excited, you're getting points taken off, right?
One of the interesting things I read about, especially during those formative years of drum corps, like you said, those big changes that really set the tone for the entire direction of the activity. A lot of it was based on taking this from a purely, military sort of regiment and focus on all these rules and these design rules, and realizing, hey, we can be our own thing, and we can focus on entertainment and not just tradition and structure. Right. And this idea that, we can design these shows, people are coming out to these and they're enjoying it, they're liking it. So why don't we start loosening up some of the rules, trying some other design choices so that, and then, suddenly the coming on from one side of the field, the symmetric drill thing, the different restrictions are like, why are these here? Right. Are these making the shows more entertaining? Right.
Or have we reached the limits of what those rules or those standards allow us to do?
Yeah. There's only so many shows you can design within that stringent of a set of standards.
Yeah. Unless you're the Blue Devils and you just keep designing the same show over and over again. So it hasn't changed since 1986. But it's the same. But you're absolutely right. At what point does it become too difficult? Because this is an evaluated process, right? It's a competitive activity. At what point does it become too difficult to have everybody master the same set of skills and then go, well, who's better, right? Who really is better? It's too difficult, right? So we've got to expand the responsibility of certain members. We've got to allow the activity to evolve so that, young people can expand themselves and they keep pushing themselves, right? If you came in as a young member now and you were still doing the same stuff you were doing in the 80s, like the education just in the elementary school and the high school level is so far past anything that was going on back then. It would be boring. Drum corps would have died. It would have died with everything else because it just didn't move with the time,
As with really anything,
right? With everything,
you have to be flexible, be able to evolve, to change with the times, or else you're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
Right.
So now we're in this era as we start to get into the 90s and the 2000s where we really start making significant changes in the trends that are happening that really kind of push the envelope of what drum corps is. And and this is always the argument a lot of people make, like, it's just high speed band now. Some of the trends like making the pit the size that it was. You're like, whoa, the pit was just allowed to go on the front sideline officially in 1982. You know, it was the first season for it. And then all of a sudden, by 1990, you look at pits and they are gigantic.
Yeah.
Right. And
suddenly you don't have to move with all of your instruments.
Right. Exactly.
And you can do that, and they can start being like, oh, well, maybe we can throw a few more in there to like evolve the soundscape a little bit, right?
Exactly.
To add a little bit of extra texture in there.
Exactly. You know, and it becomes more exciting. You know, it becomes more palpable. And you know, I say this all the time. Like, I love certain movies, and the very first time you watch it, it's like, oh my God, this movie just blew me away, right? It's like if you watch The Sixth Sense, you don't know Bruce Willis is dead until the very end. Oh, wait. Spoiler alert! Oh no, spoiler alert! You know, you don't know he's dead until the very end, right? But if you watched it again, I'd be like, this movie loses a lot of contextual because it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay, I'm watching this. It's still a good movie. I still enjoyed watching it, but
I've watched it like 4 times. I knew the twist every single time.
Right.
It's still awesome.
It's still a good movie. Right? It's still a good
movie. If you haven't
movie.
watched it, go out and watch it. What's one of M. Night Shyamalan's 2 good movies?
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Like you, and more importantly, I think, even for more context, like, right, you go back and watch classic movies, and a lot of them are great, right? Mm-hmm. But like, if movies had just kept doing that, like, it's not even like, the classics will still endure, mm-hmm. but if everyone just kept doing that,
right,
like it would get boring after a little while, right? If there weren't shifts in the art form,
right. And I think there are things that stay. Musicianship stays.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. What does it mean to be a high quality musician? Drum corps have always been the bastion of high quality moving musicianship, right? In innovation in what a brass instrument can do, what you can do physically on a field, what percussion instruments can do, you know, and the evolution of the actual instrument themselves has been pushed forward through the activity in that regard too. Mm-hmm. So without, again, these changes,
the mellophone wouldn't exist
right,
if it weren't for this activity.
Absolutely.
And we would both be very sad about that because it's such a great instrument.
Or be marching around with French horns and be really angry about it. Yeah. Right. So I think trends changing are important. And now we're in the 2000s, right? And we moved from G bugles.
I'm familiar with.
Oh, yeah, right. So we moved from G bugles to B flat.
Yep.
Right.
And 2000s had so many formative changes of like defining what drum corps looks like now.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
huge changes. You know, and I think this is my opinion on it. Part of the reason why we went to B flat in the first place is there's so many benefits to it, mm-hmm. right? That everybody's like, oh, the tuning is that, like, I truly believe, and I've seen drum corps that march G bugles, they're louder. They just are. It's unbelievable. Like the bore size, everything about the brass instrument, it's insane to try to get in tune, right? It's so difficult to tune. We used to spend hours and hours and hours just working on intonation, right? Because it's a difficult set of instruments to tune, and they are louder, but the amount of training you had to do to get that quality was really difficult. And most students, you know, again, you're talking about the education level as you're going up through the elementary and middle and high school. I went from playing a B flat tuba in high school, and then I showed up and I'm like, you have to learn how to play a G flat contrabass now, or it's G flat, a G contrabass right now. So I have to learn a whole new process, which is fine. It's kind of fun to learn, but it really deters a lot of people from. You know, maybe taking the risk of looking at drum corps, right? So then you turn everything to B flat and you go, oh, okay, well, I know how to play this instrument. I know what this looks like.
The trumpet is the same exact thing as it is, you know, in concert band.
Right. You know, baritones are exactly the same. Tubas are exactly the same. I don't need to relearn something new, right? The instrument is cheaper. It's lighter. You know, it's more accessible. More organizations make them. You know, like it just made sense. Making that trend changed a lot. But if you look at like the late 90s drum corps, you know, out there, like, you know, you look at, and then you look at the 2000, because I'm pretty sure 2000 was the first year for the B flat horns.
Or early 2000s, maybe.
I think it was 2000 itself. Yeah. You look at that, and there was, you look at those shows, they're really not that much. They're really not distinguishable. There's a lot of people. There's like half the drum corps went to B flat, and half of them stayed on G. When you look at them, they don't really sound that much different. Right, not in my opinion. Like there's a different like tone to it, and there's a little bit of a different process to it. But for the most part, they're kind of the same, you know. At least to my ear, and I've been doing this for a long time, and tell me how it sounds different, you know. Really, in person it's slightly different, but on a recording, it's hard to tell.
Like good musicians are going to make the horns sound good,
exactly,
no matter what.
Exactly. You know, and then we start to really get into some of the things. We started growing cores, you know, we started changing things. And I think one of the major things that happens in the early 2000s as far as trends is drill design. When you look at the late 90s, it kind of sort of starts, but then you get the Cavaliers that move into the 2000s and they go, like, how on earth
you can move that way?
Are you doing the things you're doing and performing the way that you're doing? And now everybody just got to go, okay, well, I guess that's whatever we have to do now.
When
you win 3 championships in a row, you know, and then you take a year off of winning and then go back and win another one in 2004, everybody's like, I guess that's what we need to do now. Right. That's what we have to do.
We got to make with the times and do it.
You got to, and there's a trend. That's a trend center. You know, that's a thing that happened. They were writing their own music. You know, the 2002 show it's all just
original comps.
It's all original comps for that stuff. I want to say there's some original stuff in 01 too, but don't quote me on that one. But I'm pretty sure all Frameworks is original written music for that show.
Yeah.
And so like you start looking at things like that when we really start getting innovative with things like copyright problems, right? As we start looking at, you know, putting things on TV, you know, I say all the time, like if change didn't happen, then PBS would never be showing drum corps. You'd never have a way to watch it unless you were live in person. You know, for all the arguments that people make, like it's not the same anymore. This isn't, you know, it's just high school marching band times 2, you know, or whatever stupid argument you make. At some point, it changed to what you love. And now it's changed to what some other young person or even old person loves.
That's a great way to put it, right?
Yeah. Like at some point,
especially like, unless you started watching it in the 40s, like at some point it evolved into the thing that made you fall in love with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And now it's something different, and the kids of today are still falling in love with it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Because it's different and because it moved with the times.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I'm okay if you don't like it. Fine. Yeah. Bye. Have a nice day. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it's
I do
grumpy.
Yeah, I do have some sympathy for it. You know, I get it because especially you know we've got. I'm okay with. I have some sympathy for it if you're not, you know, an ass about it. You know, I have some sympathy for it, like because I think, you know, I get, you know, if you like a certain style of show, if you like the way that things are certainly designed, you know, and then the activity shifts away from that, that's a bummer. You know?
Oh, sure.
I think it's a bummer. Yeah, I think it's okay to be. To be sad about it, yeah, right.
Yeah, like it's okay to like,
right? Yelling at the kids who march now, and being a jerk and like being like this isn't real drum corps, yada yada. You know, that's not acceptable. Yeah. But just like
reminiscing is okay.
Reminiscing is fine. But just being like, I liked this style of show, and now it's kind of a bummer that you know, we're not doing that style anymore. That's all right. You know, I sometimes wish more corps would do shows based on musicals because I think that was a cool genre that I feel like we've lost in the past couple of years.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that was a very 90s thing.
Yeah, and then we even saw them into the the 2010s, but like kind of stop doing that because it's just not the way that the activity is going right now. And at some point, I hope we can return to that. Maybe exactly, it'll swing back around.
Yeah. I mean, I think like everything, it becomes too saturated. You know, and you're like, okay, I'm tired. Like
how much? All right, yeah. How much new age music can we be playing? How much more like weird soundscapes can we? You know.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's, you know, I think this activity is always the changes that occur are always driven by. I don't want to say the losers, but the people who are trying to move forward in a way
trying to get that way
that the organization that's pushing whatever rules they're trying to push, because that's how all the rules change is the core directors come together and go, we have this idea, we want to change these things, right? Can we do this, right? And then the rules Congress votes on it, and then they decide what happens, and you know, blah blah blah, move forward. So one of the things, so it's always the activity changing itself, always. You know, and there's no core directors out there that are 20 years old. You know, maybe there's one or two. There's younger guys out there that are in their late 20s. But there's no children out there.
I marched with one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no children out there making choices. Right.
Yeah.
These are all people who've been in the activity they're Hall of Famers. You know, most of them. You know, they're making major changes in the activity that are my age or older. So, you know, they're the ones doing the active change, and it's for the betterment of the activity. You know, I really do believe that. It's never been more watched than it ever has in history right now. The internet helps with that quite a bit.
Yeah, so much more. It's more accessible. Yeah, being an audience member at least is more accessible than ever.
Yeah,
right.
I think seeing shows one of the things that I really like about the evolution and the trend that we're in now is that so much of the older style of show was you could kind of see everything that was going on in one shot, right? There wasn't a lot of extra. The cores as a whole functioned as one big package all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The trend that we have kind of nowadays, one of the things you see nowadays is a lot of individually sectionized things.
A little vignettes.
Yeah, exactly. What's really neat about that is that when you stop and go, oh, I wonder, I missed something. Oh, I missed something. You know what that does? That drives people to watch a show again.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go back and see it. I years ago when I first started watching DCI shows online or wherever I could find them or grab them, I would probably watch a show one time and then I was good with it because there wasn't a lot to absorb. Now I can watch a show 2 or 3 times and catch something new every single time.
Yeah.
Which is really, really neat. So,
yeah, I think this is a good, since we've kind of, we've gone through a little bit of the history stuff. We missed a lot of big changes. Obviously, there were so many to count. But one of the meat of this episode that I think I wanted to dig into is now we've about reached the point where you start marching.
Oh, okay.
Right, in history. And then, a few years later, I'm going to have started marching. I think one of the coolest things about DCI all age, right, and this all age activity that you don't really get in DCI unless you're on staff, right? But as a performer, you don't really get anywhere else. You get to live through the trends and changes firsthand.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even if you're a longtime vet at DCI Corps, the most you're going to span is probably 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Right? Which is enough time to see some changes, right? But, you and I both started, at this point now where the Corps looked very different, right? The activity and the Corps, the shows that our Corps was designing look very different than they do today, right? And I think that's a cool and unique experience that you get in DCI All Aid. I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, right? What is it like to be a marching member and to, 1 year you're doing this and then 10 years later you're asked to have a completely different set of responsibilities performance-wise?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I started in the 90s, when it was a very different landscape.
Yeah. You said 2 valves on your contra.
My first year I played 2 valves, and then my 8th year I had 4. All of a sudden, like we went from 2 to 4 within an 8-year span, as a tuba player. And so just from a standpoint of the change in, I'll say one of the biggest changes that you see is a change in education style. That was probably the biggest change that I have felt over time. Like, what do we do now in brass warm up? We do, we do breathing and we do mouthpiece buzzing, and then we do a little bit of warm up, and then maybe we touch a show chunk, maybe, and then we're like, okay, out in the field, let's go. When I started marching, brass warm up was 2 to 3 hours. And it was, and an hour of that was like long tones. And it was, very, very specific exercises. And some of them are very similar to what, like we just kind of go through an exercise now. And we're like, okay, we're good. It's really, warm up is literally that. It is warm up. And that's pretty much it. This was like one
Which also might vary from Corps to Corps, but I think that general trend, I think is.
Yeah. It some of that trend was like that because it needed to be. Because like I said, it started on G bugles, right? You needed to learn how to listen.
You spend all your time honing those skills.
Right. Way more than you did anything else. One of the other big changes that is obviously very noticeable, and this is, I think, one of the things that gets the older crowd of DCI, all age, they get riled up about it, I think, sometimes, because there's not that many older people like there was when I started. When I started, there was 4 of us, 5, 6 of us.
You mean marching in the actual course,
in the actual course. So in 1998, when I first started marching, there was maybe 6 of us that were in high school.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Maybe there were 16
that's
or
so
17.
Low for
right, exactly. They just didn't exist. The average age of the corps was probably 30 something.
Yeah. It was truly more of a senior corps.
Yes, right. Yeah. And there were people there for long times.
Yeah,
right. It was not uncommon to see a 10, 15, 20-year vet. That was just there every single year. They were there for practices were much less in the DCI all age. Like I remember my first year, we didn't do Friday nights. That wasn't a thing, I think, until my second year. And Sundays we started at noon.
Sounds nice.
It was awesome. You know, it's so great. We started at noon. You know why? Because most people went to church on Sunday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was, like we forget that, you know, a lot of this activity is very focused around, you know, the same thing. People, it's a very militaristic concept. It's very
traditional, such,
like those things, you know, there's a lot of faith in the activity at that point too. The Holy Name Cadets, you know, a lot of these organizations, they come from those places. And so Sunday practices, we went from noon to 6, you know, and that was it. It was a 6-hour practice, and it was way, I don't know. I don't want to say it was easier. It wasn't what it was. It was just less refined, maybe.
Yeah.
You know,
honestly, it's the demand was just different, right? Different on your body and on your mind, and you know, it's a different level.
I say this all the time. For all you old heads out there that are like, oh, I could never do this now because of what they do, I am living proof, and there's other people that will back me up on this. Drum corps, DCI all age now, is easier now than it was in 2010, 2011, you know, whatever those years, even in the 90s. It's easier now. It's easier on the body. It's easier for time. It's easier on some of those things because you don't, and anybody out there is over 35 or 40 right now, it's easier on the joints because you're not asked to be so rigid all the time.
Yeah.
Right. There's a heavy focus on health and welfare. There's a heavy focus on stretch and preparation. There's an accountability to the staff of preparing people for the day's rehearsal. You know, like I said, I've said it before, like back in the day, it was, you got one water break in the morning. You know, you know, if it's a hot day, we're getting one every 20, 30 minutes, you know, not even, or even every 10 minutes in some cases.
On especially hot days, I know we've had staff that's really good. They're like, we're setting an alarm for every 7 minutes or 10 minutes, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. There is so much more focus on quality of life.
Yeah. Taking care of the performers.
Yes. And everybody's like, oh, I could never dance and I could never do that stuff. I'm like, yeah, you could.
Give it a try.
Yeah, you could. Absolutely. You absolutely can, you know? And I don't think it's impossible. You know, it's like anything else. Like you take time to prepare. I am more physically prepared from a staff perspective. Like they take time to prepare me and to prepare my body for the things that I need to accomplish on the field than I ever was as a 16-year-old kid. You know, they were just like, hold the horn. What are you doing?
Yeah,
you know,
get out
there was no like, how do I be stronger? Just be stronger. Oh, okay. Thanks,
just
staff
hold
man.
the horn up.
Yeah, just do it. You know, and
just suck it up.
You know, and there's a level of learning that's involved in that. Like if you just do it, like you can be scared into being stronger. You know, which works. But
I did have this one girl in UD band. You know, I was coming back. I had done a few years then. You know, knew me, and this one girl on my phone was like, mentioned something about like me being pretty strong, be able to hold the horn. I was like, you were like, mentioned be like, do you like train your arms to like be able to hold up? I'm like, it just always hurts.
Yeah,
it never feels. I'm like, it's not easy for me.
Sure.
I just know how to kind of tank through it.
Right.
You know, you learn how to overcome the pain because your arms are gonna hurt.
Right.
You know, you and I will comment. We're holding up lighter instruments than we started on, and you know sometimes we're like, my arms hurt right now.
Yeah,
I got weak arms today.
I said it all the time.
Yeah,
I could not march with the injuries that I have and some of the ailing pains that I have in my body from the military and just from 26 years of drum corps. I could not continue to march if we were marching in the air 10 years ago. I know that I couldn't. I know that I couldn't stand in arc and just keep my arms up and have staff yell at me to keep my arms up because that's how we get stronger. Like we would do
like circle, you know, horn circle, and I swear we would hold our horns up for like 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Holding up dynasty baritones, you know, like they're like, make sure you're doing your like pitch bends, and they'd be like going through, and you'd be like,
yeah, right,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah, you know,
horn shaking,
right, and they're just yelling at you to keep it up. Yeah. Like there's a lesson to be learned in that. I believe in that, but
yeah, especially if you use it strategically, it's like any other kind of really difficult demand.
Yes,
it's like, are we using this strategically, or are we just doing it to be jerks?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So
if it's the former, you know, there's some benefit to that potentially.
Right. One of the other trends that I think is, again, it's just one of those things that's so overlooked. It has such a polarizing thing, is uniforms, right?
Yeah.
It's such a polarizing topic. And again, looking at it from a performer standpoint and from a spectator standpoint. As a spectator, I do like seeing the old stuff. Like I would love to see the blue coats come back with big shiny helmets, and because I just love those uniforms.
Every single person. I mean, it's pretty unanimous. I've seen it online. It's like people love the 13 to 15 era uniforms.
Oh, they're so
because
good.
They're awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome.
They're really good looking.
You know what else they are? Heavy and hot.
Incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah. They're cotton.
Yeah, they are so unbelievably hot, right? And even the uniforms they're
they restrict your arms. And I remember even the old blues for Bucks, which I love. Right?
Yeah,
anytime we get to use them, it feels special, right? Because it's nostalgic and it's like this. It feels like you're wearing a part of history.
Yep.
You put your arms up and you're like, why would they build these to be restrictive to your arms being up here? That's where we have them for the whole show.
Yeah. And honestly, because you never had to move them from there. Like you put your arms up and that's where you stayed. And occasionally you came horns down and then you went back up again. And that was it. Like there was no one of this flailing of arms and everything else.
Yeah.
Like, it just
as soon as we had to do stuff that was above the head, it was like, oh, we can't do that. All the shoulders will pop up.
Right.
Right.
And we talk about, these trends and like, it's the same thing, like they say, these, like the uniforms and amplification is destroying DCA or DCI. I'm like, no, it's saving it. You know, the uniform cost associated is so much less now.
Which is wild because I feel like at first glance you might expect that it's more because it's a new uniform every single year, right? It's a new costume, it's a new design.
Right.
And they have to be made every year.
Right.
It
really what it boils down to is maintenance costs. Right. Every single, one, you're fitting somebody every single year, right? You're just, hey, here it is. They order the uniform, it comes in, it fits you. Merry Christmas, right? Yeah. The amount of sewing people, that had to do all those things. Lois, Diane, I love you guys. You know what I mean? Like all the years you guys sewed uniforms every single year for every single person. That's a lot of people out there. And there's other, Karen. There's so many people in every organization that are taking up cuffs, that are doing all those things. When you just go and order a uniform and you're good, and the materials that it's made out of too, you just throw it in the dryer and you pull it back out and you're done. It's an easy wash versus getting them dry cleaned. Because the old Bucks uniforms had to be dry cleaned, So, and they're also $400-$500 a shot, and you only can get so many of them, okay, so you have 135 or 140 marching members that are going to wear those. What sizes do you pick? Well, the first year you buy them, you pick the sizes for the people you have. What happens next year when you have somebody like Nafis and I in the same line, who Nafis is 6'8", and we don't have a uniform for him? Yeah. You got to go spend $400 or $500 for a new uniform, right? Because you just don't have one that fits them. So, and you have to continuously do these things. You have to maintain them. You have to do all these things, and there's no place to do them. And now there's so much. They're breathable. I can move around.
They feel much more comfortable.
And I go back to it again. I'm 41 years old. If this was 10 years ago, I would struggle a lot more to do this activity than I would. Than I am right now, because everything's just more user friendly. Yeah. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I hope more on the uniform topic, because this is a cool one, and it's one that we've gotten to live through, right? Mm-hmm. I also have mixed feelings on it. Because like you said, from a performer comfort standpoint and from a logistics standpoint, it's so much better than it ever has been.
Yeah.
We didn't have stretchy pants the first couple of years.
Right.
You'd be like, do a Grand Prix, and you'd be like, ugh! Like
tearing through pants.
It was terrible. But on the other hand, I do think just on average, there's a lot of corps that are doing really cool stuff with the uniforms and are nailing it year after year, right? Or being really creative and really bold with it. But I do think, like, on average, and I'm not going to say the corps look bad, but on average, I think corps uniforms and designs look worse, because every once in a while you get, a meh uniform or stinker in there, right? Yeah. Whereas pretty much all the old classic uniforms looked good because they were classic, they were enduring, right?
Right.
I think we're maybe going to start to see, as you kind of talked about, you see trend shifts. Sometimes you see backswings, right? I think in the late, for context, for any, especially like newer people that don't understand, like that don't have the context for what happened, I think by the 2010s, you were getting new uniforms every year, but they were the same. They were basically the same style with a few tweaks. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Blue Coats came out in 2014. They had the usual coat and big helmet and whatnot. Right. 2015, basically the same uniform, except the sash was a little different. It was a slightly different color. It had that cool techno pattern on it. Blue Devils for a while would have like a slightly different uniform each year. They put a different color in it. They would put some extra stuff in there. Blue Coats in 2016 roll around. They don't announce the show until the millisecond before they go on.
Right.
And they post their uniforms and they come out and they're wearing skin tight shirts and pants and no hats.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if like, you were around for that, you were like, what is going on?
I remember seeing that and thinking, did they not have their uniforms in yet? And this is just what they're wearing
right. Yeah.
in the meantime.
Yeah.
Honestly, at first I did not like it because it was so simple. Right. But then you watch the show and you're like, no, this works. This works. It's making it so simple. First of all, it can make the performers able to, and that core was great at that, right?
Yeah,
the performers performing to the box, right? Emoting without the hats on, right? A lot of them to do that. And then the year after, they won with that show. And then the year after, it was just the floodgates open.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every core did it. Yeah.
I wore a sparkly spandex uniform with a big eyeball on it, right? I got to live through it. I mean, my only year of DCI, we were wearing ridiculous sparkly spandex uniforms, right, with big eyeballs on them.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone went crazy with it, And I think everyone got so excited because it was a new thing, right?
Yeah.
Very understandable. It was like, suddenly we were like, oh, we're not, right? As much as everyone loves the classic uniforms, they are a limitation of some kind, right? I'm not even saying that's a good or a bad thing. It's just a limitation, right?
It is.
Suddenly all these cores go, oh, we don't have that limitation anymore. Let's go crazy with it.
Right.
You get a few here and there, and Blue Knights the next year after that, the 2018 uniforms, not great. Right. Blue Stars that year, wearing their Tims on the field.
That was the builder one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was
or the year after that, where they wore like fur hats, and those look kind of cool.
I actually really like those uniforms.
They do look kind of cool.
They're really, really.
I feel like it would be miserable.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they were like a fur coat. The entire. Yeah.
I bring up our friend Tiago again. I remember he said once, he was like, "Oh, an entire drum corps summer of doing a show where you're pretending to be cold sounds like my own personal hell." That sounds like a nightmare.
Right. You're like, shiver, please. Like,
yeah.
No.
You're out on this Texas field, 110. He goes, I'm so cold. And like, I think that's what heat stroke is.
Yeah. Right.
So I think everyone got really excited and everyone went crazy with it, which is cool, right? You get to see some really creative designs come out. Jack Beam, our friend, got to March Madison Scouts in 2017, the Last Man Standing.
I love
that uniform rules.
Yes.
And you know what else it did? It pissed a lot of people off.
It sure did, yeah.
Which is ironic because it was one of the better looking uniforms that year.
Yeah, that is so cool. When you get an entire corps, be like, hey, everybody's cool with shaving your head, right? They're like, yeah, we are. Okay.
Yeah. And everyone grow your beards out.
Yeah, grow your beards out and shave your head. That is such, and I think Jack and I would talk, and then I realized that he marched out here, and I was like, oh, I had so many questions for him, like when I finally realized that, because it's such a cool year.
Yeah, it's a great year.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that's one of the things that, because you do lose some of the traditionalism in those things, but what you gain from that is, when you look at like, who remembers any of Academy shows, right? Very few, right? Because they're a cresting into the lower end of drum corps, right? And they're a great organization, but how many people really watch Academy on their 15th or 16th? And all of a sudden you have a show where they have a very, very unique look or a very unique thing. All of a sudden you're like, oh, I like that show. And did Madison make finals the year that Jack marched?
Yep.
Yeah, they did.
This is the last year they did.
Right. So there's other years that Madison doesn't make finals, and they're such a storied group, but you remember because they had these really neat, uniforms.
Yeah.
So there's really cool concept. There's really neat idea that make them more memorable, other than just the, oh, look, there goes the blue coats again in their blue coats and then in 12th place. Bye. It gives the watcher a little bit more of a memory, I think.
Yeah, it can be eye catching.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I think it's fun for the members too.
Yeah, it's cool to be like, what's the uniform look like each year?
Conversely, I've talked to a lot of young people that got really upset around that time frame because I
never got to wear the dots down my arm. That's why I had to put a freaking tattoo on here.
Exactly.
I never got to wear like the classic. I was like, I wanted to.
Cadets people the same way.
How many people? Yeah, never got to have the buckle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I never right? Part of it's cool. I would be kind of bummed out if I marched Bucks and I never got to wear the blues.
Right?
I got to wear them for a few years.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I'm so glad, that we've started like trying to bring it back. Like more corps are trying to bring it back for like, a certain anniversary show or for a parade. Right.
Right.
I think we're starting to see a little bit of a backswing, right, in uniform design, where people are like, oh, we don't have to we don't have to always do what's new. Oh,
Right,
it's
right.
different. No one's ever done it before.
Right.
Because eventually, if everyone keeps doing what's new and has never been done before, it gets stale and gets boring. It's like,
right.
Maybe some of the old parts of drum corps are cool. Maybe having a recognizable uniform is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Or toning it in a little bit more close.
Yeah.
You know? I tell you, somebody who does it really well and they keep freaking winning is the Blue Devils.
Blue Devils every single year has the best uniforms.
I don't know that they have the best uniforms, but they have the most consistent.
They're by far the most consistent in terms of having a good uniform.
Yeah.
Except for that weird smock they wore for the first 40 seconds of their 22 show.
Yeah.
That one was dumb. It was.
I guess they were like, we don't need to make my side.
Yeah, they were like, I guess we don't need to make this look good because we're taking it off in the first 40 seconds.
Yeah.
All the other times though, and like I think you alluded to this. You were about to get to it, right? Half the reason they look good is because every time you see them, you go, oh, it's the Blue Devils.
Yeah, exactly.
They're still recognizable.
Yes.
They're still, and yet the show, the uniform doesn't feel like it's limited and worse for that, right?
Well, I think the other thing too, when you talk about the evolution of things, I think if it hadn't been for the internet and it hadn't been for the social media content and the media producers and content creators in the last 10 years that exist now in each one of these drum corps, you wouldn't have seen the uniform switch, right? Because now you have context before you go to a show. Before you didn't have that. Like when I was coming up, there was no internet. You didn't know what, like you went to a show because you wanted to see the cadets. You went to the show because you wanted to see Cavaliers. So you were looking for green tops with spikes. You were looking for the red coats. You were looking for those things because you knew you wanted to see that corps so you could identify them. And you knew nothing about what was going on with the uniform or the show or anything else before you got there. You went in blind, just going, entertain me. So it had to be recognizable at that point.
Boomers, we'll rag on boomers for being like, oh, we can't recognize the core.
Yeah,
I don't know, there's some truth to that. But also,
there's a lot of truth to that.
But also, back in the day, you literally couldn't.
You know what they do?
Yeah.
They have this guy who goes on this microphone and goes, but now competing in DC, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, that's who that is.
Yeah.
Thanks. All you gotta do is listen. They'll tell you who it is. It's okay.
Yeah. But once again, to have sympathy and to try and read that side, it's like, I think there was something cool, right? I think there was something cool about being able to see a core and go, that's that core. That's cool.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I always say, right, I alluded to this earlier, limitations, right?
Yeah.
Limitations can be, a shackle of sorts.
Right.
Limitations, I think, also can be the area where creativity thrives the most.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at it to go back to our analogy of film, if you look at some of the absolute most innovative films ever, so many of them had severe limitations on them the whole time. Technological or schedule-wise or shooting-wise or anything,
Money.
right? Yeah. Some kind of huge limitation. And then creative people had to work, they were forced to work within those limitations and they came up with something really awesome.
Yeah.
Right? I think limitations are, restrictions and rules and whatnot are not always a bad thing.
Sure.
Right. A lot of times I think they inspire creativity. I think
I agree with that.
When we just go out and it's like, oh, you can just do whatever you want. You're kind of like, let's do this, I guess. Whereas, if you have like a rule set to work within that still allows for flexibility.
Right.
Some really great stuff comes from that. Right. Yeah. We, again, to relate to my improv days, there's a reason if you go to an improv show, you ask for a word from the audience. It's because if you just stand up there and go, be funny, you're like, I don't know what to do here, right? But if someone says a limitation or something, right? And they're like, you're in a warehouse, right? You're like, oh, okay,
cool.
I know, I have ideas from this now, right? I can work within this framework,
right?
And it's not a limitation. I mean, it is technically, but it also allows for creativity to flourish, right?
Sure.
I really want to see more corps do the whole like you can do, completely unique uniform and do whatever, but I think the coolest uniforms are the ones that are both recognizable and very unique to the show theme and fit it.
I agree with that.
Right?
I agree with that too.
Because you get the best of both. And guess what? Yeah. It's harder. Yeah. It's harder to design a uniform that looks like the traditional one and still fits the show theme. But suck it up.
Yeah.
That's I think most people agree it looks better.
I've loved the Blue Coat shows the last probably 5-6 years, right? They're
awesome.
So great. I hated their uniforms last year. They were terrible.
Blue Coats consistently the past 2 years, I will say they grew on me.
Rifts and Revelations was a great uniform. Right?
Yeah,
that looks like a fun uniform to wear until they put on all that white crap at the end.
Weird,
they were just like,
PJs.
how do we make this more expensive this year?
Yeah,
let's just put white pajamas on. Like
Blue Coat shows aren't expensive enough. How do we up the production?
How do we up the production and the value of this? Right? Yeah, exactly. It was I didn't understand that necessarily, or I didn't feel like it was necessary for the show, or whatever the case. But it was they were neat. They were neat uniforms, and then obviously the two Beatles years. Great uniforms.
Awesome uniforms.
I mean,
they brought the coats back.
Yeah. Well, it's not this is a coats, but it's like it fits everything, right? It fits their blue coat, feel, and it fits the time frame, the genre.
Yeah.
Everything.
In fact, even the 21 show with Lucy, it's like that one was kind of cool because it looked like a Beatles show, but also kind of looked like the 2016 uniforms. Yeah. It was kind of like, oh, I still recognize it as the blue coats,
Yeah.
Blue Coats has done a great job of having uniforms that the first time I see them go, that's the dumbest looking thing I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
And then by the end of the season, I'm like, okay, actually, I get it.
I get it. Last year was the only time I didn't do it. I was like,
I liked it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little silly.
It was just too much. It was just too much.
I like that they used it at least. They had a lot of like this sort of arm movements to accentuate the flaps that they had.
Yeah, I mean, I understood it. I got it. I just, from a personal standpoint, I was like,
yeah. I remember the first time that photo got leaked, and we were like, What are you doing, Blue Coats?
We were at practice.
We were at practice, and this is always the thing. This happened with Blue Knights as well. Whenever the first photo gets leaked, the uniform's never fitted.
Oh yeah,
so it looks 10 times worse than it does. It looks like he was wearing a smock / trash bag with flowers on it.
I mean, honestly, that's what it looked like. Everybody
but at least they fit a little better by the time we saw them on the field in practice.
The uniform thing is neat. I like that personally. I like that trend. Right.
Yeah. I like the trend. I want closer if we just figure out how to have a higher batting average.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In terms of like just hitting it, because there's
was it Blue Stars or Blue Knights that did the it was 2 years ago. I think it was 22 where they had all the tables on the field, and it like all the uniforms were just so they were just awful coloring compared to the props and the background. And I was like, I liked the show.
Shows I can't remember.
I can't remember. But anyway, I lost
Blue Knights was vibe, and they had like this sort of whitish uniform. So I don't think it was them.
It wasn't them. It was like it felt like a World War II kind of feel.
Oh, was it Blue Stars? And there was like a sort of 1800s show. It's like a
like a turn of the century,
Russia or something
like that. Whatever it was, but it was this very similar.
I liked the show.
Yeah, same thing.
I'm pretty sure it was Blue Stars. Yeah. I remember the guys on the table.
I liked the show. I thought the show was great, and I thought it was performed well. But the uniforming was it. I just don't think they thought through it enough to go, hey, well, how's this going to look against all the props and the green field? Because it was lost. Like I couldn't tell anything on the field, even with 4K high definition cameras. Like I was like, what's going on over there right now?
It's tough. Yeah,
it's hard.
It's hard, talking about limitations, all the color palettes you designed for a show,
right?
You have to think, how's this going to look against a big green field?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's the only background we get.
Right. I mean, you look at most drum corps and why their colors are black and something, because black cleans feet and it looks good against green against the green. That's why you don't have blue pants. Like that's such a weird thing, but like and most drum corps are like that's white and red, and cabbies are green and blue. Like even the Cavaliers, that
cream crown.
Yeah. I mean that the crown one, like it's the same thing. It was an attempt at being slightly different. That was like a little wonky to watch every year because you were just like, oof, man, those uniforms are they just look dirty all the time from a distance, but they made sense. And then you're like, oh, that's crown. Like that's just who they are. They had the brass horns all those years, and it was such a cool look. And then they go away from that, and you're like, well, they go away from it, they win.
Troopers is doing now.
Yeah, I kind of dig it.
It's pretty good.
It really is.
Troopers has been killing it.
Yeah, I also
you want to talk about like traditional style uniforms that are still unique to a show.
Yep,
Troopers has been killing it.
Absolutely killing it. That they're the Troopers when they show up. Period.
Yep. They keep the hats. Corps aren't afraid of hats anymore.
Oh yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. What's funny is that we talk about like hats and everything else too, and other than probably maybe Velvet Knights, maybe like almost all DCI corps had hats, right? That was always the thing, right?
Yeah. We wrote an entire song about the Empire Statesmen because they didn't have hats.
Because they don't have hats. That was such like every chord, like, beats on other chords, for fun and all that kind of good stuff, all in
Oh,
good
you don't have
humor.
enough money for hats, Empire Statesman?
Yeah. Oh, you guys, your tour fees are $25, but you can't afford a hat. Like, it was always that thing. Like, the only way you can win is without hats, like, and bow ties. Like, who wears a bow tie on the field when it was very traditional military kind of garb? But they were great, and they sunk into it so hard that statesman style. Is what they used
statesman
style, and they said that crap on the field, and it was awesome. Like, I used to love watching the Statesman.
I think we watched a Statesman show. I think we watched the last Statesman show last week in 2013.
That was a later show. Yeah,
super great, very fun.
Look at watch their early 2000s, late 90s shows.
Yeah,
so much fun. Yeah, they are an organization that when you watch, you're like, those guys are having a good time. And they're the epitome of kind of the trends almost hurting organizations, because it got to the point where you can't compete anymore with the older members and the way things are changing.
Yeah.
Because it just kind of like nobody wanted to get into it. And really what it was is that just people just didn't want to adapt to what was being adapted. You kind of grew out of that era of drum corps. And it killed them, because the only kind of people that could bring that kind of swagger to a field were older people. You couldn't do it as a young kid. Like, you had to have people teach you how to do that.
Yeah, there's a certain type of like old school style.
Yeah,
like
exactly. There's a certain kind of just, I don't know. It's swagger is the only words I could put to it.
Yeah,
like, you just walk on the field and you'd be like,
it's
those guys look. It's like when you're watching.
I mentioned Renegades.
Yes,
yep,
exactly. Like,
there's something about all the people on that
cool.
field being 30, 40 plus.
Yeah, just
right?
looking cool and not only doing that, but
looking like kind of silly and kind of goofy, but like in such a genuine sort of way that it comes back around to being like, this is really cool. This is very fun.
Really fun to watch. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you don't see too many shows like that anymore. It's sad. You don't.
Yeah.
Like, I say this all the time. Like, somebody please start the Velvet Knights back up again, because they would.
It's the perfect time.
Kill right now in this day. Like, it's the same thing. I say this all the time. Like, if we said it about the Blue Devils All Age Corps. Start a Blue Devils All Age Corps.
Let's go for
People
it.
will flock to it because of the name. People would flock to the Velvet Knights. If you got a great,
I would march a Velvet Knights.
Hell yeah, I would march. Like,
I would.
Oh my God,
I would ditch Bucks in a second.
Let
and
it
go
be
march Velvet Knights.
all age. We would rent an RV.
we would. And go.
We'd go do it together.
Yeah, I would 100%. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
If Velvet Knights came down, boy, Chuck Taylor's on the field. Heck yeah.
Like, hey Bucks, I'll be back next year maybe, but I'm going to go march Velvet Knights.
Yes. VK all the day.
Like, VK all day.
Their shows were so fun, and and you look at.
I would wear big Elvis hair.
Right, exactly. Get eaten by a shark. Like it's so ridiculous. Some of those shows are so outrageous, and hands down, we still talk about it today. They're some of the most favorite shows out there. So you don't have to be with the trend all the time and move with that. You just have to be authentically yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And do those kind of things. So, I guess one of the other things maybe we want to, like, I don't know, broach a little bit. We talk about trends, and depending on how much longer we want to talk about this, is the electronics trend.
Yeah. Well, we can have more of a, we can get into it a little bit. Yeah. I mean, I think 2000, just as a little history, I think 2004 was the first year amplification.
That early? Really?
I think so. I remember hearing that. At first, like, amplification was allowed, and then electronics came a short while after. Because, I mean, listen.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's different. You're right. Amplification and electronics are a different.
Yeah, because I mean,
right.
Cadets had a whole show where they were doing mic voiceovers in 2007.
Yeah, that was. I think that was the first year for that, because
that was kind of voiceovers.
Yeah,
although, I mean, 2005 had voiceovers.
Did it?
They were just part. Yeah, I mean, The Zone. Where the woman's like rattle, clash, clang.
Oh, yeah.
Or the
yeah.
The drum solo that was just with their mouths.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And the audience said 90, and the judges said 99.
Yeah,
there you go.
Such a good show. Such a
great show.
It's a really good show. And so like people don't think I don't think sometimes the rules and the trends that we change into are for really, really great reasons, and then people find ways, like you said, there's a restriction here. So we find a creative way to use that restriction and make it our own thing. And then people look at that and they go, that's not why we changed the rule. You can't do that. The reason why we changed the rule, put amplification in there, is because drum corps were murdering their pit equipment, and that stuff is expensive. There's over $100,000, well over $100,000 of stuff on the field before amplification, before all the computers shooting all the stuff and everything, the speakers and everything. Just the pit equipment itself, the xylophones, marimbas, all the timpanis, everything else that was out there. It's over $100,000. They were crushing those keys every single year. There wasn't a drum corps came off the field that didn't have the same set of equipment that they went on tour with.
Yeah.
So when you look at that and you go, why is that happening? Because we are playing so friggin' hard because we're trying to get over the horn line and the drum line that have,
they're very loud.
They're very, very loud. And it was again, you go back and listen to those early 2000s, unless the core wasn't playing or they were playing in a dynamic, it was very difficult to hear the pit. Then you add amplification in or the miking in there. And all of a sudden now you can keep front ensemble equipment for a few years and you can recover financially, from the expenditure that comes along with that.
I think it also, one of the things, huge benefit for amplification. It sort of relates to that. It's like you get a different timbre when you're slamming the instruments or when you're blasting a solo to be heard than you do when you get mic'd and you can go, oh, just play comfortably, right? I remember when I was mic'd up in 22 for the solo, they were like, just play it at a comfortable volume that you feel like you have good tone in, right? If we had not had amplification and I was on that, on like those boxes, in the middle of the hash far away, I would have had to play that solo so loud and it would have sounded worse. It wouldn't have sounded as good, right? There is something cool about an unmiked solo.
Oh yeah.
Right, when it's done right.
Yeah.
But it's cool to have the option,
When you have old school screamers, from the 90s and the 2000s before they were amping things, and those dudes were just ripping through notes.
Was it Scott Dean, I think, was the Blue Devil soloist who just cranked double C's over the entire BD 2000s horn line.
Yeah, I mean,
awesome.
Yeah, dude's just
great. Crossman, 2012 soloist from what's it called, Earth Song, the Michael Jackson.
Oh yeah.
Piece who just comes out and screams double G's.
Yeah, over top
like
everything.
5 times. And it's so loud. Yeah,
it's
plenty of great place for unmiked solos. Still, right?
Still, and I love it.
But like I said, it's cool to have the option for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. But then and again, this is always my argument with everything is like, I don't mind when things get creative. I feel like there is a little bit of an unfair advantage in some groups that have the financial wherewithal to do things like I said, like BD 22. It's not really, sorry, Connor. It's not really a great show. I don't like it that much. I think there were better shows that year, but either way, when you have a quarter of every single one of your horns mic'd up so that they can pump through volume.
Is that too?
Like at what point are we just going to put mics on every single instrument and just say, go to town? Or are we going to mic all the snares too, so that, and then just fade in and out and clean up all the gobbledygook so that everything that comes through is clean. And, like everybody's like, well, that's actually a pretty good idea, because you could do that, you could adjust all those things.
Is basically almost what they're doing, right? I mean, that's the reason you mic up a quarter of the horn line, right? It's because you get some really strong players, and then you can balance it.
Yes, Not only that, they don't have to play super loud, so they can play at a comfortable timbre. Which for me, that one's kind of a personal I want to play.
We can get
loud.
deep into the weeds with amplification later, but I mean it's a similar thing.
Yeah.
And I also this is so much of these trends are dictated by entertainment and by the production of it.
Yes.
Which is great. But at a certain point, it is still a competitive activity.
Right.
And I think there's a benefit to going, oh, we have to achieve this thing. We're going to have to work hard or think creatively in order to achieve it.
Right.
Right. I think that the balance thing, the reason that they're doing it is because it makes it sound better, right? It makes a more balanced sound. It makes it easier, right?
Right.
But when you're doing it just through electronics and through a guy who's just an audio engineer going through, it's like, at what point are we kind of losing the fact that all the marching members have to,
contribute?
What am I losing as a member if I'm marching Bluecoats and I'm not one of the people that's mic'd up and I'm like, they're just, and there's kind of like, play quieter.
Yeah, right.
Because this guy over here, these 3 people over here on second trumpet are the ones that are going to get hurt.
It's like playing third triangle in the pit. Like, that's great. I'm here.
At what
you get to hear me at one point, but I'll contribute. But
at what point do members start to lose out when they're not that mic'd person because they don't have to be, they don't have to, it's just an interesting question. I want to.
I mean, listen, we can go back and forth about it all day, and do all those things. But I think really kind of maybe the way to end this episode is to go, that they're trends for a reason, right? They come and then they go, right? And then they move into different areas and different things. And without the changes that we've had, we wouldn't be where we are today, and there's arguments to be made, well, maybe we'd have more drum corps. I doubt that, right? Drum corps don't fall apart because of the changing.
They have to spend a little more on props.
Or whatever. Well, but a little bit more here and there. They fall apart because organizations fail sometimes, and it's just the reality of what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any.
Or one guy racks up a lot of money on litigations.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It was like, well, we just can't do this anymore. Right. Yeah. When really corps fall apart and go away, because I've never heard of a corps going away because of whatever trend was happening. They couldn't afford to continue to do that. Right.
Yeah.
They go away because they've mismanaged themselves to a point where, they're incapable of continuing forward.
Yeah.
Or they just don't have the support systems necessary to do that stuff. So, trends aren't killing corps. If anything else, they create more corps. If anything else, like sound sport's a new trend.
Yeah.
And there's 40 or 50 of them things right out there now, which is super neat.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think, a good positive point to end on, because especially we got a little salty about not nearly as salty as you will be. Don't worry. We'll have some this versus that debate sort of episodes later.
Yeah.
But a nice positive thing to end on, I think, is like when it comes down to it, you and I have a couple of trends that we're probably a little salty about, and we got some, we wish we had done that and that, right? But by and large, we have been there through a couple of trends. You a little more than me, but Buck shows my 2015 show looks completely different than the kind of shows we have been marching the past couple of years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very, very different design. Right? The shows that you were marching back in the 1990s or 2000s, you're unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of design and
they're
demand.
of their era.
Right? But we keep coming back to it because we get to experience those trends firsthand. And, at the end of the day, I hope we've shown this throughout this episode. It's exciting, right? And we're excited to be here, and we're excited to I feel so privileged that we get to be a part of it.
Yeah. Oh, I do too.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That we get to be on the forefront, and when it's like, we're doing new weird stuff this year.
Yeah.
That we're like, cool.
Right.
Put me in there. Right. Yeah. My visual responsibilities as a marching member have drastically changed from when I started marching. And that's cool and exciting. Yeah. Right. It's cool to be trying new stuff.
Yeah. I don't want to be bored.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I don't want to do the same show 10 times in a row. Right. It's really cool. And I'm excited for where the activity is going to go next. I'm excited that it keeps changing.
I am too.
Always.
Yeah.
It's 100%. Really cool.
Yep, definitely. So well, that's our little all over. This is probably the most unorganized conversation that we've had.
Well, there's so much to talk. Honestly, if we were not concerned about, episode time, I'm not. I would bet you that we could go for another 4 hours.
At least. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at some point, you don't want to bore you guys out there.
Yeah, exactly.
But hey, listen, this is
we'll
a topic.
Save more
this is a topic we can easily come back to.
Exactly.
Get down in the comments. Let us know, maybe some trends that make you angry or some trends that you really love. And
some of them that we missed, right?
Maybe we can get on and, and talk about them a little bit more in a future episode, or, maybe just in intermittently through something else that we're talking about. Like I said, we're pretty active with all of our listeners, and we want to engage with all of you as often as possible.
Especially like this is still a pretty early episode, right? Relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Right. It's more easy than ever to throw your voice in there and have us hear it. And we're going to keep reading the comments no matter how giant this empire grows.
Right. Listen, when we're 10,000 strong, listeners, and you're just one of the few. Right,
it's going to just be hard to get your voice.
It's going to be difficult to be heard. So you
right now, get out on the ground floor. Tell us what to talk about. Right, tell us what you want to hear.
Yeah, if I see your name all the time now, I'm going to remember you later. Exactly. When we're famous. And important.
Yeah.
So, thanks again for everybody who came out. Appreciate you listening. It's always been a pleasure. I'm Michael.
I'm Robbie. Yep. I have been Robbie.
You have been Robbie?
I suppose.
I call you Robert all the time.
Oh, yeah. Robert. Yeah.
Nerd.
A bunch of people are like, who's Robert? Who is this guy? Especially since you say it and then my name flashes on the bottom and it doesn't say Robert.
Yeah. I did it on purpose.
Yeah. That was a good one. All right. Yeah. Well, I think that's all for us then. We'll see you next time. Until then, off cycle.
Yeah.